Have you ever wondered why your resting heart rate matters more than your weight or even your genetics? Your heart, unlike your skin, muscles, or liver, cannot regenerate itself. Once it starts deteriorating, it never fully rebuilds. That means how you treat your body today determines how long and how well you live. And here's the brutal truth. Most people walk around with chronically elevated resting heart rates, yet they think they're healthy. A chronically elevated heart rate equals stress plus inflammation plus higher risk of cardiovascular disease, which equals shorter and a less quality lifespan. But here's the good news. You can begin to lower your resting heart rate with targeted lifestyle inputs starting today. Let's break down exactly why this matters and how to do it. Now, before we talk about solutions, there are some key numbers and key metrics you need to know and track. First of all, of course, is resting heart rate. We ideally want that below 50 beats per minute. Secondly is VO2 max, which is your cardiorespiratory fitness, and we ideally want that greater than 40 to 50 ml per kg per minute. Then we have heart rate variability, which is HRV, and ideally we want that greater than 100 ms, or at least when you're sleeping and recovering, we want it spiking into the hundreds. And finally, body fat percentage. Now, this is a rough estimate because everybody's an individual with individual circumstances, but ideally we want males below 16 to 18% body fat and women below 20 to 24%. These are predictors of long-term health, performance, and longevity. So let's continue to dive into this topic of how to lower your resting heart rate. Now, granted, the elements of your health and fitness that are going to have the greatest leverage for obviously optimizing performance, making you feel better, perform better day to day, but also feeding into longevity and quality of life. These variables and things that you can leverage, they generally take longer to improve than things that are quick. And the reason I say that is a lot of people are looking for like a quick fix. What can I do now? Yes, we want quick wins and things we can implement quickly and start to see results so we can create a positive feedback loop. However, these things that we can do and habits and things we can implement that have the strongest leverage take a lot longer to develop. For example, strength training is significantly important for just life, looking good, feeling good, but it takes a lot longer to develop than compared to like cardiovascular fitness. Obviously, cardiovascular fitness is very beneficial, which we'll talk about because it relates to your heart. But the reason I say this is obviously, yes, we want to lower our resting heart rate, but realistically, it takes a long time. Now, I'm not saying that you can't see improvements over the span of like 6 to 8 weeks, 12 weeks, a year, 6 months, something like that. But you have to play the long game with this. And this is where implementing positive habits daily, weekly, and being consistent with it will lead to that new baseline, which is going to be an elevated baseline, which you always will revert back to, right? And if you can revert back to that baseline, which is at a high level anyway, you're generally going to function much more efficiently. Your performance is going to be better and you'll tolerate stress better. Yeah. And obviously you will be healthier. Now, the reason I say this is because when I first got my Oura Ring, it was in 2021. So we're still kind of in that COVID like thing going on. And at that time, yes, I was obviously younger, fitter, more physically fit in terms of how much I could train and stuff like that, because it's 5 years now. But my sleep was really bad. I didn't really think at the time, I didn't think it was bad, or I knew that I went to bed late and woke up a bit later, but I generally felt okay and I seemed to be training well, getting stronger, stuff like that. I do remember I had a number of injuries around here, so that could be a factor. But once I did start to improve my sleep, my cognitive performance like 3x'd easily. And that's a massive thing we can benefit from improving our sleep and our resting heart rate, which they're both correlated, right? Now, so looking at when I first got the ring, 2021, this was a general sleep for me. This is what I did most of the time. So I was going to bed about 1, 2 a.m. and waking up about 8, 9, something like that. And then like my general heart rate, it wasn't high. This is not this I wouldn't say this is high. This is still like in the range of optimal. However, I would get like spikes into the 50s and 60s and stuff like that. And this is actually one of my better sleeps at that time. So I've gone through the data on my phone, and this is one of the better sleeps. So yeah, I was reaching a low of 44 and I'll be averaging 49 during that sleep. And the heart rate journey is generally quite positive here. But yes, this can be improved. So this was my baseline at the time. Obviously, I've up to that point, I've been training for 15 years or whatever it was. I had done a lot of cardio as my main form of training when I was younger. So I had generally good heart health anyway. And at this point, I was still very physically fit and I was in very good shape. I'm still very physically fit now and I'm in good shape, but a lot of my health metrics are a lot better. And notably, one is my sleep. So this is from this week. And I've just been experimenting with some supplements and stuff and just like general routines. And at the moment, this is my general sleep. Now, there's times where I push on my sleep in terms of going to bed a bit early and waking up, going to bed a bit early and waking up earlier. So this will look slightly different, but generally speaking, this is where I am at the moment because I'm working quite intensely on two coaching projects and study it as well. So I tend to like have a lot of screen time. I'm working a lot. Cognitive load is very high. I'm being stretched cognitively. So I end up going to bed a little bit later because I want some time to kind of just sit there and just watch stuff, chill out, and not having to feel like I'm working. So that's why my sleep's a little bit later. But this is the latest I will go to sleep. The only caveat to that is sometimes when I play football in the evenings, I tend to have a spread dose of like 400 milligrams of caffeine. So basically that fucks up my sleep. So I don't end up going to bed till about 12 or 1, just because I can't settle down until like that plane has landed, so to speak. And obviously being able to settle your body for sleep, the way I like to see it is that you're landing a plane and it takes a while to land a plane, right? If you're flying a plane, as you know, or you've been in a plane, not that we fly planes, but you've been in a plane, you know that it takes a while to land a plane. The pilot doesn't just drop the plane down. There's a trajectory from far out and there's a path laid to land the plane. Now that's how you have to see your sleep, right? If you're just trying to like get into sleep right away, that can be quite difficult and you're trying to land the plane. You're basically trying to dump the plane. But if you take a little bit more long time, hour, 2 hours prepping, then you should have better sleeps. So that's usually what I try to do. That's why sometimes, especially after football, it takes me a while to get to sleep. But generally speaking, I sleep from about 10 to 11 and then wake up as early as I can generally. It depends how much work I have to do and how I'm feeling. But anyway, this was the sleep from that week. This was an optimal reading output for everything. For me personally, and you can see the lowest I reached there is 39 and my average is 44. So my lowest was 44 and that's my average now. And obviously I'm dipping down into the 30s. The lowest I've clocked is I think a 38 and a 37. Maybe I'll improve on that. It's not something I'm like particularly trying to improve, but I just optimize my sleep and then review the data, right? But my point is, this is a 5-year difference between this, right? So it takes a long time to see these improvements, and that's why you have to try and implement the habits consistently. Now, I'm not saying you won't see improvements more quickly than I have, because you probably will if you implement things I'm giving you in this video, but also things with my clients. I try to implement things a lot faster so they can see results faster, right? However, it does take a bit of time. Right, so moving on. Why a lower resting heart rate is important. Your heart never rests. It beats roughly 100,000 times per day. So the fewer beats it needs at rest, the less wear and tear it sustains. Countless studies show that higher resting heart rates strongly correlate with greater risk of cardiovascular events and all-cause mortality, even after adjusting for age, fitness, and other risks. Cardiovascular disease remains the #1 cause of death worldwide. And obviously looking at this study here, they concluded that The data clearly demonstrates that elevated resting heart rate should be considered as an independent risk factor for all-cause mortality. The observation that elevated resting heart rate in young adults, middle age, 20 to 50 years, served as a better predictor of all-cause mortality than hypertension calls for a paradigm shift, particularly among these age groups. And we suggested it's time that resting heart rate should be regarded as a vital clinical sign, measured and evaluated at all clinical visits. And of course, a lot of coaches and people in the health and fitness and wellness space are noticing that a lower resting heart rate obviously correlates with a better quality of life and better predictors of health and fitness and performance, right? So this is something that you should be trying to optimize and improve consistently. So looking at risk factors for cardiovascular disease. So these are your physiological warning signs. So what I've highlighted here is high resting heart rate, high blood pressure, low VO2 max, low HRV, high body fat / obesity, poor metabolic health. And each one independently increases risk, but when they stack together, risk grows exponentially, right? And what is an optimal resting heart rate? So let's get into some real data here. Generally, a good general resting heart rate for general population is somewhere between 50 to 70 BPM. However, if you are in this bracket here, I would significantly urge you to improve that. Highly fit individuals, you're looking at 40 to 50, and in elite endurance, you're like 30 to 40 BPM. And for the record, the lowest ever recorded was roughly 25 to 26 BPM. And I think that was by a guy who was a biathlete, so it's like winter sports. I think it's like skiing and shooting or something ridiculous. But generally speaking, a lower resting heart rate equals a more efficient heart, right? So how does the heart function, and how can we use this knowledge to help ourselves, right? So first of all, as everyone knows, your heart's number one job is a pump. It pumps blood. It is a muscle. It is a very strong muscle, and like any other muscle, if you train it, it gets stronger and more efficient, and so forth, right? That job is determined by cardiac output, CO2, heart rate, HR, times stroke volume, which is SV. So heart rate, how many beats per minute, and then stroke volume, how much blood is pumped per beat. So one thing we also need to realize is that we can't really increase our max heart rate. You can probably increase it from baseline if you're like unfit or average, something like that. But when you get to like elite levels and stuff like that, the max heart rate doesn't really get higher. You just get better at sustaining max heart rate. You get better at managing it and doing work in that zone. You just get more conditioned, right? But you won't really increase your heart rate, your top end. But what you will increase for most people is your resting heart rate and your stroke volume. So when stroke volume increases, your heart becomes more efficient. That means fewer beats needed at rest and more reserve when stressed, basically. Yeah, so that's basically it. Right, something we also want to think about is basically like this zone 2 epidemic at the moment. I'm not saying you shouldn't do zone 2 heart rate training and low intensity. It does have a place and context, of course. If your training is quite intense and you have periods within your training that is intense and you need to plug in some other training to aid recovery and whatnot, yes, zone 2 might help in certain circumstances. However, if you're actually trying to improve your cardiovascular fitness, your VO2 max, your resting heart rate, the training has to be quite vigorous and hard, right? So if we're training slow, so to speak, zone 2, stroke volume does not increase that much, maybe modestly. And then effort you make is a very small benefit to the heart, right? But if you train hard, so run fast to race faster, you get the benefits of increasing stroke volume, yeah? And then obviously that's effective heart muscle training, and that's what we want. Now, science, of course, does prove that low resting heart rate equals lower cardiovascular risk. And here's what some research tells us. A 2024 meta-analysis found that every 10 BPM increase in resting heart rate was associated with a significantly higher risk of cardiovascular mortality. Lower resting heart rate is a proxy for superior cardiovascular efficiency and resilience. And as we can see from this study, as expected, there was an inverse linear relationship between resting heart rate and lifespan, which remained significant after adjustment for potential confounders. Subjects with a resting heart rate over 90 BPM had a lifespan of roughly 70 years, whereas subjects with a resting heart rate less than 60 BPM had a lifespan of 79, of course, and we can see from this data. And that's an average difference of 9 years. Quite significant. So how to lower your resting heart rate? You cannot hack your heart into better performance, but you can train it. And that is the most important part. So the number one thing we want to start with is vigorous physical activity. Not all cardio is created equal. Zone 2 training can help to build base endurance and can help with recovery, but it's not enough if your goal is to lower your resting heart rate. High threshold aerobic and anaerobic training improves VO2 max, stroke volume, and cardiac efficiency faster. High intensity interval training improves cardiovascular markers much more efficiently than low intensity endurance alone, especially if you're busy and don't have 1 to 2 hours to go for a long run. Your best option is to do hard, high intensity, high threshold anaerobic and aerobic training, which should be vigorous physical activity, basically, right? We then want to look at how to reduce body fat. Of course, excess body fat increases inflammation, stress, and workload on the heart. The leaner you are, the easier the heart can operate. Focus on protein-rich meals, stable blood glucose, caloric awareness, and consistency over perfection. Okay, moving on. Apologies, I've put that in twice. Ignore that. Right, so next, eliminate harmful habits. These habits force your heart to work harder every day. So things we want to eliminate are smoking, alcohol, excess, sugar, chronic stress, negative relationships, and the haters. Eliminate the haters at all costs and as soon as possible. Moving on, we can look at stress tolerance, which is a hidden key. Most people never really learn how to switch stress on and off, and this is where you can learn to separate yourself. This stress modulation, your ability to endure stress and then recover, is a key thing we need to learn how to do and also learn how to do in real time. And it can be hard to develop that skill, but there's ways for you to practice and teach it to yourself, basically. And of course, we can do that through cold exposure and sauna or heat exposure. And of course, the cold shock increases heart rate initially, then improves parasympathetic recovery, basically teaching your autonomic nervous system how to balance. And then heat exposure, stresses from heat increases blood flow, increases stroke volume, and improves cardiovascular resilience. And the combination of cold and heat is one of the most powerful hormetic tools for heart health and performance. And of course, remember, stress isn't generally the enemy. Poor recovery is. Train the stress response and you can master recovery. Looking at sleep circadian rhythm and supplements. So obviously sleep is when your heart recovers and rebalances. We all know that. And we can optimize this by, of course, trying not to disrupt the circadian code, which is your natural biological clock, which your body follows and your heart follows. We can optimize this by trying to avoid food 2 to 4 hours before sleep, meditation practice or mindfulness, breathe in, reducing blue light exposure before bedtime. I would say aim to reduce blue light in the day as well, especially if you're in harsh lighting at work, if you're on a laptop for extended periods of time, on your phone. You should be trying to block blue light out like you're trying to block out the haters, bro. Straight up. Reading, not scrolling. One of the easiest things you can do to help regulate your nervous system is to read an actual book. It's literally proven in science that it lowers stress levels. Not reading on a tablet, not reading on your phone, reading on an actual book. And of course, red light exposure in the evening supports melatonin production. Red light exposure is one of the quickest wins and literally the lowest hanging fruit things you can do to improve the quality of your sleep, but also help with your nervous system to regulate itself. We are still very much tied biologically to the sun and the light that the sun emits. So if we can mimic that in our environment, then you're going to help optimize these variables for your sleep and circadian rhythm. It's a no-brainer to swap out bulbs in your house for red light bulbs, swap to smart lighting. Don't use lights that are overhead when the sun is setting, only use lamps, etc. It's really not that difficult. It's just that most people are just too lazy to do it, right? But once it's done, game changer. And of course, better sleep equals better autonomic balance equals lower resting heart rate. Some supplements we can look at, some things that are evidence-based. Now, while supplements are not magic, these can support recovery and calm the nervous system. And these are the only three I would really recommend for sleep. And that's magnesium glycinate and threonate, so a combination of both those. There's probably a couple of other versions of magnesium to include, like taurate, I think it is. But these are the main two. So mostly glycinates like a daytime, threonates for sleep and general relaxation. And obviously that will help support the nervous system and sleep quality. Glycine is a massive one, really effective. And we want to be dosing up to 10 grams, depending on how big you are, male or female. And it has a really powerful calming effect on the body, so obviously helps to improve sleep quality. And lastly, apigenin, which is a plant flavonoid with relaxation support. Now, putting it all together, here's the secret. Obviously, you cannot out-train a toxic lifestyle, but you can train your heart, and you must train your heart. You must recover your nervous system. You must live in a way that supports resilience and balance. This is all about changing your lifestyle if you actually want to lead an improved, higher quality life, especially when it relates to your health and fitness, your ability to perform well at work, your ability to tolerate stress, and just live at your fullest potential, right? All right, guys, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed that one. And of course, if you want genuine results, more energy, better performance, and a stronger, more confident physique, this is exactly what I specialize in. Shoot me a message and we can have a chat. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, give the video a like. If you've got any questions or comments, drop them in the comment box below and I'll reply as soon as I can. Have a good one.